Hi, and thanks for joining us for the fourth installment of Bridging the Gap. My name is Jared Jones. I'm Director of Investments and Associate Financial Advisor here at Omega Wealth Management in Arlington, Virginia. Today, as always, I'm joined by Lisa Kirchenbauer, founder and president of Omega. How are you, Lisa?
I'm good, Jared. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. As the title indicates, we've launched this show to bring you our differing perspectives on money, markets, and life, whether it's through the lens of gender, generation, political orientation. We hope to inform, educate, and entertain you. On today's installment, we're going to be talking about 4 different topics. The first is the class and political divide that has been caused by the crisis. We've had a good column by Peggy Noonan come out a couple weeks ago. Next, we're going to be talking about this is being the first she session. We're looking at who's impacted by this and comparing that back to 2008, 2009, and the differences there. Next, we're going to be talking about, is this a recession with none of the perks that usually come along with downturns in the marketplace? And last, we're going to finish off with Lisa talking a little bit about her experiences traveling this past week. She was out of the office for a brief period of time and was working remotely and traveling across the country. So she's going to share some of her experiences there.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be providing you with weekly updates from Bridging the Gap with ideas for you to ponder, think about, and connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and our YouTube channel. Please go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. We'd really appreciate that. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. So our first topic is really just the class divide that we're noticing and somewhat political divide that we're noticing with the coronavirus. It seems like the haves and the have-nots are becoming more distinct on their views of the pandemic and how we're able to operate. You know, I think I can relate to it a little bit, just working for this firm. We're able to work remotely and pretty seamlessly. We're able to service our clients pretty well, even though we're not being able to see them face to face. But people, their livelihoods depend on being in front of other people and working in person. So I think Peggy's piece was mainly around that reality exists for a lot of people, and it's important to remember that. And sometimes we can just be thinking about ourselves more or less and not realize how others are experiencing the world, and we can cast our judgments on them. Even though, we're not in the same shoes as them, we can earn a living still without having to go out into the world, and we can do our best to social distance. But, mix all that up and throw in some politics. This is an election year for sure, and some wild conspiracies are out there. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are on all this, Lisa.
Yeah, I was really struck by that piece too. It was a good reminder to me that, again, to your point, you can really get in your own bubble, as somebody who can work from home. Things seem, to be going okay. We're not having to get in food lines. We've seen those pictures of cars and cars and cars, people trying to get food donations, the people who are on the front lines. Or, maybe a small business owner, somewhere in the country, and they're really struggling. And maybe they got some of that paycheck protection money, but it's not enough. They need to open up. And so just that, I think remembering to be gentle with others, to be non-judgmental, which is one of our Omega, core values is non-judgmental, or being judgmental, and having some empathy for what other people in the country are going through. We're all Americans. We have different experiences. We have different resources. And, we all need to take a deep breath and not only be appreciative for what we have, but to also try to put ourselves into the shoes of others who may not be as fortunate, and not get sucked into the political rhetoric. I mean, unfortunately, it's out there. It's an election year. It's easy, depending on your news of choice, to get sucked into that narrative. And I think it behooves all of us as Americans to try to step away from that and, and appreciate each other.
Yeah, I was just looking at Twitter before we hopped on this, and I saw that Virginia is now making it mandatory that everyone wears a face mask when they're out and about. So.
Right, which is a whole other thing, right? I mean, and I'll talk about that a little bit when I get to talking about travel. because it's a big thing when you're traveling. You know, if you're not wearing a mask, you tend to get some looks. You know, but I mean, I think it's one of the things, I think that's a really great thing to have mentioned, Jared, because I think the whole mask wearing thing is another great example of you're not just wearing it for yourself, you're wearing it to help protect others, honestly, from you.
Yeah.
And when we can take that sort of, you know, that outward view, outward mindset, right? That's that book that we love, Outward Mindset, as opposed to the inward mindset. I think we're all better off.
Yeah, it's funny how the masks have been a huge point of contention, and, you know, don't take away my rights, my liberties, but those people maybe aren't thinking about, you know, how many people are actually asymptomatic. Who knows what the percentage is there, but it seems like that's a real thing. And, you know, why not? I get it, it's uncomfortable and you don't look the best, but, you know, it's just one of those things. But all of that to be said, I think bringing it back to Peggy's point of not getting on an ivory tower wherever you are in life and just, you know, proclaiming like everybody should wear a face mask and all that. But it's definitely, I'm finding it a fine line to walk on how to think about this. And I find like going back and forth, like between the sides, I think there's been a lot of people complaining about governments maybe overstepping their bounds. And I think there could be an argument there, but at the same time, Americans place so much behind individual liberties and freedoms that we don't necessarily think about the community as a whole as often as some other countries might, and that might reflect how many cases we have and how many deaths we have. So it's a complicated mess.
It is. It's a sensitive one, and I think, you know, the bottom line on this particular issue is, you know, if you come from your heart and you can be a little more empathetic, it goes a long way to us all moving forward in, you know, in a positive, healthy, productive way.
Right. Yeah.
So on a similar but different note, we wanted to talk about this concept of the first she session. What does she session mean? Well, it's a recession where women are more impacted. I'm quoting, this was from a New York Times article, column written by Alicia Hardasian Gupta, why some women call this recession a she session. The quote is actually from a woman named C. Nicole Mason, president and chief executive of the Institute of Women's Policy Research. And she said, we should go ahead and call it a she recession. And where that's coming from, just in case people are not getting why we have to put a gender on this, is because in the 2008-2009 recession, some of you may recall that that was the group of people that was most impacted were honestly white, middle-aged men. And so that was called a man session. Honestly, I don't remember that. I guess it's too long ago, or I was too worried about other things to put a gender tag on it. But this one, the reason why people are calling this a she session is because of some really amazing numbers. So of the 20.5 million jobs that were lost in April, just using April as an example, 55% of those were women losing those jobs. And this was from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so the unemployment rate for women had gone from 3.1% in February to 15%, whereas for men it was 13%. So, you know, it's close, but there's definitely a difference. More dramatic is, and this is not a surprise because we're seeing this also with the actual health crisis, is that Black and brown women were more impacted. So the unemployment rate for Black women was at 16.4%, for Hispanic women 20.2%. And this is the first time since 1948 that the female employment rate has reached double digits. So it's pretty, and not surprising. The reason why that's happening is the areas of the country or the economy that are most impacted have been leisure, hospitality, education, and even healthcare, you know, caregivers, that kind of thing. There's even been some cuts, or, you know, people deciding they don't want somebody coming into their house, whatever it might be. And so that's really what's contributing to this she session. So, you know, my concern around this is, a lot of statistics that many of us know that women tend to be paid less overall still, across the board, as opposed to, certain demographic areas. And they tend to be out of the workforce more. They don't get to save as much. So then having them being unemployed for some period of time, whether it's permanent or it's temporary, really is a problem for women from a financial planning standpoint. So, I thought it was worth bringing to everyone's attention. And, hopefully we will see some resources put together to help women in these industries and who are unemployed get back to work. The other tricky thing about this is that they're often doing a lot of the work at home. And I know we're going to talk about that, I think, on a future show, right, Jared? And we're going to talk about how men perceive their contributions at home these days versus what's really happening.
Yeah, that's right. I think we have a funny statistic to share with everybody. But the interesting thing, I saw Jerome Powell in 60 Minutes this past week too, and in addition to women, you can look at this and slice and dice the statistics however you want. Another area that's been hit pretty bad is people making under $40,000 a year as well. So, I think in the last recession, we might have seen some white collar workers lose their jobs and that kind of stuff. But it's been amazing to me, just largely how the upper middle classes have been relatively unaffected by this. I think the top 10% of the country owns 85% of the stock market. And the stock market, and we were just talking about this with some clients, it's only down maybe less than 10% on the year, around 10%. So that's not a huge piece of the pie to lose versus losing your earnings. I know that there have been some boosting to the unemployment wages, but that's going to dry up, I think, in July. And it's going to be a battle, I think, in Congress on what gets through and what continues. So we saw the first attempt try and go through, and it failed last week. I think your point is right. There are going to be, this isn't going to go away. There are going to be needs for people, and additional help is going to be necessary, I think.
Yep. And I think it's going to go in waves. In other words, as I keep talking about with some of our clients, is that what I expect we might see is, that come end of June, beginning of July, when the paycheck protection money wears off for a lot of businesses, they might have either rehired or kept people on board. Now they're going to let them go because they really, that was not enough support. As I've been telling the tale to some of our clients, the airlines have already announced that they're going to have layoffs in October once they complete their commitment to the government for the money they got of keeping people employed till September. So I think we're going to see this go in waves. And actually, the client we were just talking to recently said that at least in this area, a quarter of restaurants are probably going to go out of business. So I think you're going to see this, we talk about waves with the virus. I think we're going to also see some economic waves as we hit these various milestones. And so I think that will continue to hit especially the lower wage workers, and as we're talking about in this piece, women more than just because of the nature of the jobs that they're in.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be interesting. I think if it all works out well, if we can make this increase to unemployment work and not cause massive inflation and the debt just to skyrocket, it will be interesting to see how the future plays out with all of this.
Yep, that's probably another story to talk about as we move forward.
Absolutely. So the next topic we were going to cover is this a downturn or recession with none of the traditional benefits that you see in a recession? Typically, you might get a buying opportunity in the stock market, and we might have had that back in March. I think February to March might have been a good time to buy, but we often talk about how hard it is to buy. It requires intestinal fortitude to the point where you have to be able to buy at the exact worst time when confidence is at the lowest point. And we know there's plenty of research out there to show that it's relatively impossible. So like we saw in past recessions, this one lasted, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah, boom, it was over.
We're back up 30+%, I think, at this point. So not much of a buying opportunity right now for that. The other places we would traditionally look is maybe there's a real estate softening. I'm looking at that in the next few years, I think, and was a little disappointed that the buying opportunities haven't quite stacked up. We were reading from Redfin. We'll link to this in our show notes, but home buying demand has come back, and now it's up 5.5% on demand to where it was before. So 5.5% above where it was before the pandemic. Inventory is at an all-time low. Maybe not all-time low, but it's pretty low. It's down 24%. And that's a recipe for prices not going anywhere and probably prices going up. So median listing prices are up 5% on houses. And the bidding wars all over the place. There's a quote in the article from a Seattle realtor saying, my client was in a 24-offer bidding war for a 1960s home that grandma had never updated. It was listed at 360. They bid 400 and didn't even come in close. So I can't imagine being in a bidding war like that. That would suck. And not even getting close. So it's we're not really seeing traditionally where we would see the softening. So it's kind of like a bummer, we're not getting any of the benefits of the downturn. We're just getting the pain of it.
Right. And not even that, as we were talking about at the beginning, I mean, we're not even, for you and I, we're at home, we've got, a roof over our heads, we've got food, we've got income coming in. This is a one of a kind experience because it's both health and financial. And it was so quick. I mean, it took us the entire, 08, 09 extravaganza was about 300 and something days, 350 days or something like that. And I mean, this whole thing down, up, all happened so quickly. It's been challenging because I've been waiting. We haven't had an opportunity to take losses on our clients' portfolios for literally years. We used up all the losses from 08, 09 several years ago. And I mean, that may sound odd. Why would you want to take losses? Well, they're, to offset against gains. There are times where you want to rotate out or you need to sell something, and having losses that you've banked to help offset gains is really helpful. But I mean, as we've been looking at the portfolios, there's not a lot of that to be found at this point.
Right. And, the speed at which this happened, I think might play a little into it. Maybe you can talk about the amount of contacts we had for this go around versus 2008, 2009. I think you said in the weeks leading up to the low point, we had more contacts than we had. I think people were rightly a little concerned. We saw the markets declining. There were some days that were down 10%. Plus, Great Depression level declines, and those kind of statistics were out there. But it was crazy there for a little bit, but then we bounced right back.
Yeah, and the other thing I think on this particular topic, as far as the lack of benefits, the other thing that we're not seeing, and we'll save this for another show to really unpack, and that is that the interest rates are low, but you're not seeing mortgage rates where they really should be.
Right.
And that's a whole other phenomenon that's going on in the bond market, where we're actually, normally if the Federal Reserve drops interest rates, you see that in credit card rates, you see it in mortgage rates, and we have not seen that drop. We were hoping that we'd have some clients be able to refinance their mortgages, but it's not making sense for a lot of folks unless they were in the 4 and change range. Yes, that's probably worth refinancing, but if you're at 3 3/4, it should be lower. We should be in the high 2s, but we're really not. So we'll save that for another time. But that just adds to what you're saying about the fact that this is just an unusual recession. At one point it was even perhaps a depression, but certainly unusual recession.
Yeah. And for those of you wondering if maybe you should look at refinancing, our quick rule of thumb is if it's 1% less than your current rate, then it might make sense to look and go through the hassle of repapering and paying all the initial setup fees. So we'll cover that in more detail next time. But
well, let me say one thing though about that, Jared, just in case we send people up. If for whatever reason you sought out mortgage forbearance, i.e. deferring your payments for a few months because maybe your income, your cash flow was tight, you are actually it may be almost impossible to refinance at this point. Was just reading about that today in the Wall Street Journal. So, you're going to have to tread carefully on trying to get cash out, maybe even doing a refinance at all. So you'll want to check carefully with your lender on that. So yeah, it's just, continue to be things that do not seem normal for where we are right now.
Yeah. So you did a little traveling this past week. How'd that go? I'm curious.
Yeah, so it was really unusual. So I had to get on a plane. I was just going one way, so that was good. I didn't have to go twice on a plane. It was nonstop from here to St. Louis. And so first of all, you get to the airport. Like normally, I'm at Washington National Airport. There's cars everywhere. No cars. Drive right up to the curb. Walk right in. There's like virtually nobody in the airport. Security is a breeze. Lots of whoever's there, mostly with masks on, but nothing's open. I mean, maybe a little bit of grab and go food, but if you're going traveling on an airplane this summer, bring your own food and water, because you aren't getting anything on the plane, and you're probably not getting something before you get on it. So just that whole experience was super odd, but it was quick. There were definitely people hanging out, at the gate and everything. But interestingly, I was flying Southwest. They said there were 100 seats. They only had 50 people on the plane, spread them out pretty well. The boarding was interesting because they made it so that only 10 people, how Southwest, they do that whole, 1 through 30 and you get in the line. Yeah, well, good news. They're not doing that right now. They're taking they'll call the numbers and only take 10 people at a time. So everything takes longer. That's the thing I think you have to understand is you got to have patience, and it's going to take longer. So got to the airport, had to get a rental car, had to wipe that whole thing down. That was pretty contactless because I was using Hertz, which we'll talk about in another episode when we talk about bankruptcy. Got a car, drove around, just really unusual, and got my son packed up from college, and we rented a U-Haul truck, which was also interesting, and then drove from St. Louis home. Had to stop overnight on our way. So if you stop in a motel, if you decide you're going to do a road trip, again, you've got to either get food delivered or you got to go get it, because the restaurants aren't open. They had a little bit of breakfast food, but I was better off going to Starbucks.
You did Panera, right?
Panera and Starbucks were my friends on this trip. And so, and it was interesting as you cross state lines, the differences between, mask, to your point, mask, no masks, do you put gloves on, just lots of things to think about everywhere you go, stopping in the hotel, trying to get food, getting gas. It's just a complete different process. I will say, the traffic was lighter, lots of trucks, at least on the road that we were on, lots of long haul trucks. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of, they're carrying a lot of supplies back and forth for all of us staying at home. Thank you. So yeah, it was a little surreal. I hadn't been on a plane in 2.5 months. So I felt a little out of practice for the whole thing. They did give me a hand sanitizer packet when I got on,
nice.
Which I appreciated. But you were supposed to bag your own trash, and yeah, it was different.
What was the mood like on the plane? Because I think one of the things that I'm kind of concerned about is, going through this 3-month, however long it ends up being period, are we going to be too afraid to be next to people? Were you able to, space yourself out on the plane? How'd that go?
They tried. I've talked to some other clients, a couple other clients who've been on planes. And, obviously if you can fly business class or first class, if you're lucky enough to do that, that's the way to go, because there's a lot less people. But it's sort of impossible. If I'm in a seat by the window, but then there's somebody in the middle, or, even on the aisle right behind me, it's not even 6 feet, because the seats are so close. So it's, if you're nervous about your health, maybe you have a compromised system, you really should not be on a plane. If you're going to see somebody who is going to be compromised, you definitely, I think, need to think twice about it, because it's just, what I read was airlines need to be at 75% capacity to break even. And right now they're trying to run at less than that, like at 50 or less percent. Some flights are even hardly, especially international, seem to have hardly anybody on them. But it's just hard. You're just too close in contact. And, back to the whole mask thing, there was a young woman, a row or so in front of me, who did not have a mask, never put a mask on, got on the plane, was on the plane, no mask, on, off, the whole thing. And there was another guy and I who just looked at each other and thought, again, to our point, it's not like, I'm glad you're healthy and you're in great shape, but you could be the one carrying. You don't know. We could be carrying. So, you know, you're doing this for other people, not just for yourself. And so that was interesting because you definitely get some looks if you show up on the airplane without a mask. You know,
Yeah.
bandana, regular mask. Oh, the other thing which was great was several in the Walgreens, I was able to get a 50 pack of disposable masks, which you
Oh,
can't even
nice.
get around here, right? You can't get them here.
No.
So I bought 2 packs. Couldn't buy more than one at a time, but I bought 2 packs, brought them home, brought some gloves home. Yeah, so was able to pick up some PPE on my road trip. Yeah, so it was an interesting experiment having to do that. I don't know how much we'll travel this summer, but we'll see. So, yep, that was my adventure.
Well, it doesn't sound too bad. Hopefully it went well. And I don't know, last time I traveled, I remember counting down the days, like, okay, it's been 5 days since I got home. I'm
Right. Well,
probably good.
because yeah, you and I were on the West Coast. I mean, right before this whole thing happened. So, you know, we took our last flight, you know, what, a week or a week and a half before we locked down. So yeah, there was a little bit of reason to be concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say international is probably, well, not to mention, you know, I was reading, I think, I'm not sure you can get into Italy, at least as Americans. I mean, there's going to be a lot of places we aren't going to be able to get into for a while because we don't exactly have the best health record right now. So, you know, I
Yeah.
think you have to plan carefully. You need to be flexible, probably not plan too far out. And, you know, the airlines, at least at this point, they're still pricing their tickets pretty high out to the holidays. So I think it's just best to wait and just, you know, plan a little bit shorter term than you might normally.
Right.
Yep.
Absolutely. So I think that's a good place to end this one. Thank you all for watching, and please remember to like or comment wherever you're watching this, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, do it all. And thanks again for tuning in.
Take care. Stay safe.